Good.
Yeah,
Okay. Richard Norton, welcome to the lockdown sessions.
thank you.
Richard, this is excellent because unbeknown to all of the people listening, you're actually next door right now.
Yeah, that's right. You probably hear the dogs barking.
So you've got two in your house, Peggy and Bruno, and I've got two in mine.
Yeah,
I think we've been neighbours now for years, so I thought it'd be really interesting to invite you on to these podcasts because you have, I'm going to call it a privileged position, although I'm sure at times it didn't feel like that. A privileged position because you've been working in the NHS right through this pandemic. So not just frontline, like super frontline. We were clapping for you guys, and we'll come on to that later. I'm interested in your view. Now you sit as you mentioned to me an advanced clinical practitioner, which is a group of guys. They come from all disciplines that are brought
yeah,
together to advance their clinical knowledge, and I also assume your ability to then execute that clinical skill on patients coming into the hospital.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Right. Okay. And when we first met, you were a paramedic.
yeah,
So you've come from that route. Okay. So
yeah.
you just lived a year through COVID in the UK. You've also got three boys at home who were homeschooling. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long this answer is going to be. So I've set it up quite long, I think. What have you been observing during lockdown? How did you cope working in the front line, three boys homeschooling, and all the noise of death and illness and trying to keep people safe at the same time? I mean, what's that year been like?
It's it's been a funny old year, I suppose.
Right.
Is one way of putting it. Yeah, it's been a year of real ups and downs, of conflicting emotions,
Yeah.
all over the place, both professionally and personally. I think the thing with work is when you're actually in the thick of it, it's only when you sort of take time out, either on days off or when you're driving home, that you actually then sort of really reflect on what's gone on that day and what you've been in. I suppose, I mean, as the whole thing progressed, I think the overriding sort of emotion was initially, how am I going to get it? Really was a real strong feeling, and you lost colleagues as well. So both colleagues on the ambulance service and colleagues at the hospital, and I think that was a real emotional sort of roller coaster, because you feel, first of all you're thinking, am I going to get it? And then you feel, because I did get COVID, and you're sort of then thinking, because the really weird thing with the disease was it affects people in so many different ways.
Right.
And that was one of the hard things. It presents in so many different ways. So, like with the elderly, it will present with it can sometimes present with just delirium, which any infection can. Right. So it's not always the real marked sort of signs like the cough, the temperature, the loss of taste and smell, which came in. Some people present with diarrhea and vomiting. So every time you're feeling a bit under the weather, you're thinking, right, is this me? Am I getting it? Yeah. Am I going to pass it on to people? And there's all of this, and then you see. And because you see elderly people come in who actually it didn't affect that badly, and then you see really young people coming in who it did affect. And I think that was just I suppose it's a bit, you could equate it to like you're being sent into something and you don't really know how it's going to affect you. So you had this like, because obviously the hospital needed to sort of keep the COVID patients, or what was deemed to be COVID patients, separate. Right. So you do a certain number of hours in there, and like it's this, I suppose it's like a going to war sort of thing, really, especially in the early days. You're sort of you sort of, or can you go into a couple of hours in COVID? So you're then getting dressed up in your PPE, which was different to what you'd wear just in the normal department. And it's this, like, you're sort of getting dressed up to get sent in, and it's a bit like going to war, really, in that respect.
And I suppose you're constantly thinking in those 2 hours when you're going in, is this the moment when I could then pick it up? And so you've got this daily, I imagine, this daily concern. I won't call it a fear, but this daily concern. So how long into it did you actually then contract it, and were you asymptomatic, and how did you notice?
So I got COVID in April. And funny enough, I think, you never know for sure, but I think if I did get it at work, I think I know the patient I got it off, and it wasn't a patient in the COVID area, funny enough.
Wow.
I think it was because, again, it was a bloke that came in who was having a seizure. And like I said, it's like you get different presentations with different people. And when you're trying to not restrain someone having a seizure, but when you're trying to sort of stop them hurting themselves, and you have to get quite close to them, and they're pulling their mask off, etc. And then, funny enough, the people that were surrounded in his care, a few days later, everyone started getting COVID. So it was a few days after that, but I don't know for sure whether I got it off that patient. But funny enough, I'd been out for a run, and it was April time, and I came back and I started coughing a little bit, and I thought, I wonder if I'm coming down with a bit of hay fever, because I've been over the fields. And I literally had a cough I just could not get rid of, very transient, probably for about an hour. And then I just slowly started losing my taste and smell. But I actually felt very well. I felt good. And it was literally my loss of taste and smell. And I didn't really realise that until probably a couple of days after I'd lost it. Because I'd said to Nicola, do you know, I really can't taste what we're eating. And we went back through what we'd had, and we'd had like enchiladas one night, and we'd had curry.
Be able to taste it.
Food. It wasn't very bland like food. And I thought, I can't taste any of this. So I remember Nicola saying, "God, come on, I wish I hadn't bothered cooking that now, because you can't taste it." Yeah, exactly. And it lasted for about 2 weeks, and then it slowly started coming back. But there was roughly 4 or 5 things that just remained, that when you smelt them or taste them, it was actually just a really nasty ammonia smell.
Right.
And and I still and now it's more or less back to normal, but there's just like things, so onions, leeks, garlic, that sort of family still has a very slight ammonia smell when you cut them or taste them.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. And how did you then? So you would then isolate for 2 weeks?
So no, at the time it wasn't, because the taste and smell wasn't recognised as a symptom at that point. And I didn't ever run a fever, and I literally had a cough for less than an hour, which I probably put down to hay fever at the time. I didn't isolate, but which goes on to this asymptomatic, because at the time we weren't lateral flow testing at work, so it was a bit like that. So the only time I fully probably confirmed that I had it, and it may well not have been that time, but I think it probably was when we did antibody testing later on, and it showed that I was positive to it.
Right.
And then the funny thing was, a week after getting the antibody test to confirm that I'd had it, my youngest then fell asleep at school because he had a temperature, got sent home. We all tested, he was negative, but because he had a temperature, I was then self-isolated for 2 weeks. So it was like I had confirmed antibodies that I'd had it at some point in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Then had to self-isolate with a negative test. And yeah, it's just very bizarre, the whole progression of it all, really. And that, I feel, that I sort of think, was I at work with it? Was I infecting people? But that's the nature of this disease. It's asymptomatic with quite a lot of people, and at the time there was this building thing that it is loss of taste and smell, but it was never really recognised till quite later on. I think sort of July, August time.
So my older brother just lost his taste and smell, and it literally came on him one morning when he was drinking a coffee he'd made and realised he actually couldn't smell it, and he has really strong coffee.
Yeah.
And actually, he went and got tested. He was positive. He had 4 girls, 3 of them at home. And just like you say, at that point, taste and smell was part of it. Sickness and diarrhea, I think, was announced sort of October time as a present. So the more we learn, did you notice the way people? Because when people come into hospital anyway, then my experience is I'm normally more nervous going in, whether I'm visiting someone or I need to have something done. Right? I don't go to a hospital to feel good. But I do go to feel better. Did you notice more fear? Because I know we've talked about, society's talking about what's happening to other health conditions as we get caught up in COVID. But from someone who's seeing those people come in, was it just COVID, or?
So in the first wave, numbers really dropped off with non-COVID patients. Really, really dropped off. Which is telling in a way. So I think with that, there's a combination of how many people really do need to attend an emergency department at that time, but then it's very hard if someone deems it's their emergency, they deem it's their emergency. Right. But then equally, there was quite a lot of probably late presentations of things like heart attacks, like strokes. So really, you're not catching them in their 4-hour window where you can, send them to the cath lab if it's a heart attack and try and open up arteries, or the same with strokes. You can't thrombolyze them to try and sort of break down clots, etc. So then they're more left with like long-term residual damage. So yeah, you were seeing that in the second wave. Not so much. People didn't stay away as much. But yeah, and you could see people were scared of coming in. Very, very scared. And I think part of that was because you have to sort of operate a no relative coming in with patients. So people were coming in on their own. So it would only be things like if you needed people to translate, if people were very much end of life, or if they had advanced dementia, sort of things. Really, that was quite sad when you're sending people away, but you have to be very stringent, because you can't say, oh, okay, yeah, that's it, because it's not fair on the next person that's coming in, and especially when you've got people in a critical condition and you're not allowing their relatives in at some points. Right. You've just got to be really.
How do you influence? Because people are so emotional in those moments. I mean, it's fight or flight in that situation. I mean, they're probably not looking at you as just trying to do your job. They're looking at you as getting in their way.
So I suppose, yes, it's communication, isn't it? And it's how you talk to people, and it's explaining the situation. And I think you just have to be very blatant about it, I think. And you just have to say, look, we have to social distance. We can't have relatives in, because, when you're trying to juggle a load of patients, and especially in the first wave when you don't know who's COVID and who's not, you just have to explain to these people to say, look, we've even got people who are really unwell, end of life, and they haven't got a lot of relatives in, or they're not allowed relatives in. And then, you can hear people say, yeah, okay, yeah, that's a fair point. And I think you just have to be brutally honest to people with why you can't allow them. And I think, honesty, then if you explain why without dressing it up, people then understand.
Yeah, I think you're right there, actually, because most people just want it straight.
Yeah.
Like in the calm of day, actually, of course I understand why you won't let me in. In the moment, I've probably got a major problem with it.
yeah, no, exactly. And people did have, and funny enough, the people which you understand is the sort of 17 and 18-year-olds coming in who really are deemed as adults, but right. To their parents, they're not. Right. Coming in with appendicitis, coming in with mental health issues. And you have to treat each patient differently. But, ultimately, if an 18-year-old is coming in with query appendicitis, you have to say to their parent, look, I can't have you in there. I will update you. You can go and wait here. You can go and wait in their car. You can ring as many times as you want. I'll give you my name as you've got to take contact, because I think people feel better if they've got someone to ask for. Even if I'm not particularly seeing your patient, ask for me and I will try and find out. And I think that makes it a bit easier if they've got a name that they feel, okay, I've got someone I can ask information to. But yeah, you know, funny enough, they were the hardest because they're like, that's my child, and they're so used to being with their child the whole time. And all of a sudden, you're saying, A, it's this realization, oh no, they're an adult, and B, you can't be with your child.
Try telling my mum that, and I think
yeah,
you know, that would be an argument. I can see it happening.
yeah,
Or any parent who's got a child in need is going to stamp their foot and scream and shout until, you know. I wonder, I'm curious actually, did you and your colleagues have to adapt how you work, say from last year when you were operating as an ACP? Did you have to change, adapt? Did you have COVID strategies for having to do things just really differently, that you had to like adapt your way?
Yeah, without a doubt. And, you know, I think it's probably well known the NHS is quite a slow beast of introducing things, protocols and standard operating procedures that would usually take months to come in were suddenly changing really quickly. You know, you'd come in and constantly you were just thinking, we're running out of space in COVID, we need to try and find out another COVID area. So then you're sort of reducing the sort of areas where you're treating non-COVID patients to sort of seeing COVID patients. So you're constantly a bed juggling thing, and you've got to adapt to that. So you've got your red phone going, which is I'm sure you've seen on, you know, all like sort of 24 hours in A&E is your pre-alert phone, and you know you've got pre-alerts coming in, and you're taking the call, and then you're giving it to the consultant, and you're looking at the board, and you're thinking, I've got nowhere to put these patients. I've got nowhere to put these be it either a really unwell COVID patient or a non-COVID patient, and then you're trying to have a clean resus, or you know, which is a non-COVID patients to a COVID patient's resus, and sort of walking COVID area where hopefully these people can come in, be turned around very quickly, and then you've got your non-COVID bedded patients, your COVID bedded patients don't need resus, and you're constantly trying to juggle all those areas and constantly getting the phone calls in saying pre-alert in 5 minutes, pre-alert in, you know. Right. And that's and you're looking at this board of how many patients, and then you're looking at the list of how many patients are in the department, and you're thinking, you know, where are we going to put these patients? But it's constantly a bit like tactical chess of moving things around, and it's like, okay, you're looking at all your resus patients to think who is the least unwell resus patient that we can move out, even though they probably shouldn't be moved out, to move someone else more unwell in.
Wow. I mean, I've seen stories of, you know, places in India where you've got people lying in rooms with tubes going out of windows and down 3 floors, plugging into an oxygen tank on the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
They don't have a ventilator on that 4th floor that they're on. I mean, it's in some parts it looks tremendous, but that stress and pressure, because that's every day, right? I mean, that's not like, that's a cycle of 24 hours or however long you're on shift, right?
Yeah, it's all the time. I mean, luckily you're not in the COVID area all the time, and you know, it's not the final decision, not with me to where the patient's going to go. That's the consultant's job, but you do get involved because either you're the one that's taking the call, or because you're seen as a certain, not senior member of staff per se, but you're seen as a permanent member of staff with a certain level of responsibility. You do get involved in that because you know, you sort of, looking at the board and everyone's thinking, I don't know what to do. It may be you that could say, right, let's do this, let's do that. Or I'm seeing that patient, and yes, I think they can move. But I suppose the one thing to say in all of this is I think colleagues in ITU had it even worse, really. I think they were just because in A&E people are moving in and moving out, and yes, there may be delays moving them out on bed spaces to the wards and stuff like that. But I think ITU in all of this had it, you know, they had it unbelievable.
Well, there must be a sense of responsibility that you have when you're in a job of service orientation like you are. there's a responsibility for, you know, the care of those people in your charge. So I imagine if you're working in an intensive care environment, if there's any risk of not having enough space or the right equipment, or that must be an intense heavy weight to carry, because there's literally nothing you can do. I mean,
no, you know, you just, I think we're so much better at treating COVID now. You've learned more, but I think at the beginning you're trying to do things that aren't always working. You know, you're playing catch up the whole time with a new disease, and I think, you know, I could just, you know, speaking to colleagues, and I can just imagine how horrific it must have been up in ITU. Absolutely, you know, because they are seeing the sickest of the sick patients. Right, you know, we are seeing COVID patients who some of them you will turn around very quickly, because I mean, it actually made you quite ruthless in a way in your decision making.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How did you prioritize, like, who stays and who goes? Like, go home, you're sacked apart.
Yeah. So as you learn stuff, the respiratory team at the sort of hospital I work at developed a sort of performer with a scoring system. There's a lot of scoring systems for many things. Like, so for argument's sake, for someone who comes in with chest pain, you can sort of risk assess them by their bloods, by their past medical history, etc., to see, yes, they're not having a heart attack, but are they stable enough to go home and have outpatient cardiology review, or do they need an inpatient cardiology review? So there's scoring systems for many things, like you know, like blood clots, pulmonary embolisms. You know, can you start treatment and see them in the community, etc. And the scoring system was developed for COVID patients about how unwell they were, and you use that especially in the second wave, and that was quite good because you got something to hang your decision making on. And yes, some of it was quite ruthless, as in, like, you're not going to get a chest X-ray, you're not going to get any bloods, you're going to be going home. But also what was done, it was people were discharged to a virtual COVID hospital. So they weren't just sort of off you go. The details would be passed to someone who would touch, you know, and these practitioners would touch base with them virtually over the phone. And they'd be discharged with a pulse ox probe, which would measure their oxygen levels. So you could phone to say, when you would sit phoning these people, I wasn't involved in that, but they would say, "Oh, what are your oxygen levels on exertion? Oh, you need to come back." So, but you had to be quite ruthless, as in, when you're seeing someone there and then, you don't need to be admitted. You need to go home. And it's like with any someone you're sending home, you just give them really good safety net advice. But yeah, so there was scoring systems which were good for making decisions, but I think it did make you more ruthless, as in, yeah, you can go, yes, you need to stay, and yes, you need to come. Whereas before, when in pre-COVID times, you might be a bit like, oh, I might observe you for a little bit and this, that, and the other, but you just didn't have that luxury, as it were.
Right. So actually, yeah, that's the word, isn't it? You don't have the luxury of letting them just stay there for a couple of hours and check them. Maybe monitor them. Actually, do you know what? Go ahead, because we've got a queue.
Yeah, which you would have people queuing. You would have people, because, you know, at some point you've got ambulances queuing to come in down, you know, into the non-COVID area, and then you've got ambulances queuing to come into the COVID area, right. And it's like trying to make sure these queues don't meet, as it were. But yeah, which comes back to the tactical, like, chess game, really, of trying to maneuver constantly. So yes, you do have to be ruthless, but you are making an informed clinical decision. So you're not sending anyone home that is gonna, you know, hopefully come on well. But it's like anything, you don't know where you're going to see them on their disease progression, because you don't know where they're presented. So you may see someone who's already been at their worst and they're coming in, or you may see someone at the beginning, which is why with anything, it's like when you probably go to your GP, you will get safety net, worsening advice. That's fine. I'm sure you're fine at the moment. Take these antibiotics, for argument's sake, that if you start developing hot and cold sweats, not passing urine, becoming increasingly lethargic, you know, your localized skin infection has become systemic. So it's the same thing with COVID, really, because everyone presents differently, and everyone it affects everyone differently. You always have to give them this worsening advice.
Yeah, so actually, and actually, I think people being more conscious and mindful of how they're feeling. I did get the sense that when someone got a headache or they sneezed or someone coughed, I noticed when I was out in the first wave, I was running during the day. So, and you'll know the areas where I'm running. You would see families out walking on their 1 hour's walk. And I would observe, and sometimes if somebody was walking towards you and they coughed, there's like the parting of the Red Seas amongst people, right? There's this kind of suspicion. I wondered, did you get to see some really nice moments of humanity? Because in the hospital, often you see people at their darkest, but did you get to see nice moments, whether it was from your colleagues or from patients or family members, where it kind of touched you beyond the normal day?
Yeah, I mean, you didn't really see much of the relatives because they weren't allowed in, but you would speak to them on the phone, and they'd be very appreciative. Yeah, patients were very, very appreciative, but so was the whole wider community. So you'd have constantly local businesses bringing in food, you know, and that was just unbelievable. I can remember one of the popular coffee chains, just before they were all told to shut, brought all their stuff in for us to have. You know, and it was really weird things. Supermarkets were bringing like hand creams and shower gels and stuff like that. And I just, and that I found really, really quite touching, really. And it's quite emotional now how people really, really supported you. Yeah, and that was really touching, and people would just say thank you for everything you do, you know, and I'm sorry I didn't mean to come in. I know you're really busy, but you know, you still life still does go on, you know, with the COVID patients and the not COVID patients, and you've got to treat them, and you know, and you want to treat them, and it's just how people were, especially in the first lockdown, there was just quite a good sense of everyone's in it together sort of thing, I thought, which was, you know, because people are making their own sacrifices. Everyone is making their own sacrifices. And you know, in a way, I was lucky because I was still going to work. My life didn't change that much, in the respect that I was going to work, I could have a laugh with my colleagues. I wasn't worried about losing a job. I wasn't worried about where money was coming in. Whereas I think other people had it really, really harder, and that's where I sometimes struggled with all the outpouring of appreciation. Which I'm never good with appreciation and praise anyway.
Like a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and I just struggled with it a bit because I was thinking, you know, we don't need on a day off to push in the front of a queue in the supermarket. We don't need to get 10% off. We don't need that. And not so much with my colleagues, but you have all these Facebook groups, COVID support groups, and this, that, and the other, and they were set up with good intentions, but they're quite a negative thing to see around. There's people expecting it's their God-given right to get everything free because they're working for the NHS and this, that, and the other. And it shouldn't be like that, because it's your job, it's your chosen job, and yes, it's a rough time in your job, but you know, everyone has ups and downs in their jobs, and at the end of the day, it is part of what you got into, and you are getting paid, and you haven't got the pressures that some people have. So yeah, I struggle with it in many ways, really.
What was that like? Because in our village, Thursday nights at 8 o'clock, actually it was, especially in the early weeks of it was emotional for those of us standing just clapping, actually. I can't imagine what it must have been like when you just come back from a shift and you actually hear literally everybody in their street clapping. I remember Nicola, who's your wife, in case everyone's wondering when you mentioned Nicola. I remember her posting something on our village Facebook page, just saying that it was just beautiful.
Mm.
What was it like? Because they, everyone in our street knows who works at the in the NHS.
It's really. I mean, I've got a bit like my dad. I'm quite emotional. Really, I've got tears in my eyes just thinking about it because it was really, really emotional to actually sort of see how people were appreciating what the NHS is doing. But and it was amazing. And I can remember there was a video outside the hospital where I work where all the police, the fire brigade had turned up, welling up now, and
just talking about it.
No, with all their lights flashing, and it was just absolutely amazing. It's just, and I think it's not so much the wow, look at us, we're getting the support, but I just think how it brought everyone together in a way because you've had things like Brexit and you've had quite some divisive things in this country recently, and I think it was just emotional how everyone sort of came together, especially in the first wave, and showed their appreciation. But I can remember sort of putting on Facebook, on the Village Network, but really everyone in the NHS is clapping back at you because of all the sacrifices you're making as well to try and make this thing go away or easier.
But there are moments when actually you guys also do just need to say thanks.
Yeah,
it's nice to be appreciated because even though it is your job, it would be, I'm sure there are, geologists and mountain rescue guys. I love the Highlands of Scotland. Well, I'm sure there are days, weeks, months where those guys are right in it in the middle of something and they're really having to pull out a shift. And that's what you guys have had to do. But I do think that sense of community, I saw it in our own village, offering to run meals for people. There was a sense of like global empathy and compassion. And for someone who works in leadership and humanities, it was beautiful to see. I worry that we'll lose it and we'll just go back to being suspicious of each other and not.
Yeah, I think we will, unfortunately. But it was. And I just think that sense of community, everyone coming out was really good. And I was like, I can remember Nicola saying, you need to come out, and I didn't want to because I was quite like, this is all embarrassing. I don't need this, and I knew it was quite emotional. And I can remember going out, and Nicola was saying it's important to people to do this for so many reasons. But you're right. What you say.
Well, I know that when in our house, I don't know who it was, whether it was Emma or Charlotte or Oliver, probably not Oliver and me. So it would have been Charlotte or Emma. Would have an alarm that would go off at about 5 to 8 on a Thursday, and they'd call around the house. Emma would text me if I was in my office and say we're going outside now.
Yeah.
So it became part, and I think there comes a point when it's like, okay, enough. Because if I was a member of the NHS, there would have come a point when numbers were escalating and I saw some of the kind of images that I'd have said, look, don't worry about clapping for me. Just socially distance, wear a blinking mask, stay at home. Don't worry about the clapping. Just stop spreading it. I wonder now as well, when you look back, are your boys aware of the environment you've had to work in? You have kids ranging from primary to secondary, so you've got the toughest age group of all, and they're all boys, so they need to be with their mates.
Yeah.
Are they aware of both the pressure Dad's been under and the fact, how have they been coping with out there?
Yeah, they're very much so. I mean, they were every so often sent a WhatsApp picture of me in full PPE, just to remind them for them to have a laugh at. But like anyone, they've had their own set of pressures, and I think it's been harder for them than a lot of people really. There's a couple of things that sort of pop into my mind. I mean, one is to say that I think mental health is going to be one of the long-term effects of this. We see that now of people coming in, of the effects of isolation, the effects of support networks being far away, etc. and another thing, I can remember my sister saying to me, her youngest is 18 in July, and so at the beginning of sort of lockdown, he was just starting 16, and those really formative 16 to 18 years, you know, have all been spent in lockdown, and I think I think this is, you know, everyone's a bit like, oh, teenagers, they're fine, but they should be going out with their mates. They should be going to parties. They should be drinking. You know, Adam was sort of getting, my eldest, he was getting to the stage where he'd go into Harpenden and they'd all get the train down to Nando's and St Albans and stuff. And, you know, that all stopped. And yeah, he was fine because he could sit in playing FIFA all day. And I'd say, you need to go out. And you're like, I'm just doing what Bojo told me, Dad. I'm just doing what Bojo told me. And I'm like, he probably would let you go out for a run, not just play FIFA all the time, mate. But, you know, I think it's been really, really hard for them. And, you know, my mum actually texted, you know, the elder two and said, you know, thanks for what you're doing for keeping us oldies safe. And, you know, and I think that's, you know, you forget the sacrifices the school kids have made as well, really, like everyone has. But I think the teenagers especially are the sort of unforgotten sort of group in this, really, and the sacrifices they've made as well.
Well, you know, I know, you know, I've got nephew and nieces of that, and they didn't get to do their exams. They didn't get to graduate uni. You know, our Charlotte here, you know, she's done her first year of university, a mixture of being here in her room, being in her halls in a room. Her whole first year at university, she's really only met the people in her flat who she lives with.
And that's wrong. That is so wrong. That's not what university is about. Because it's not just about, you know, back in when I was in Leeds many years ago, it's not just about your degree. It is about it's about a whole 360 holistic approach to uni, isn't it? You know. And
Richard, if you were in Leeds, which is where I spent my university days, then there's always a visit to like Mr. Craig's on a Thursday night.
Yeah. Mr. Craig's.
Which would keep anybody busy. If you haven't experienced I'm sure it's not there anymore. But
no, it's not. But yeah, it was when I was there.
In the late 80s and 90s, Mr. Craig's on a Thursday night was the place for university students to go and pull.
Ritzy's on a Monday.
Ritzy's was great as well. It had all those mirrors on. Yeah, I remember Ritzy's as well. Yeah, that was good. Student bars. But you're right. It's a completely different experience for them. I know when the kids finally went back to school, I could see that your two youngest, they just seemed in a really good mood when they came back. I could hear them in the garden. They're on the tramp. They just seem so pleased to be back with their friends.
Well, yeah. It's you know, it's all the sacrifices are made, and now they can go out with a couple of mates. I think is really important because, you know, I mean, you know, they need to speak to people. They don't always want to speak to their parents about things. They just want to, you know, like, you know, you want to go and have a laugh. Like, you're going to have a laugh with your mates. I go, like I said, when I go to work, I could still go and have a laugh. You know, and they need to do that, don't they? You know, they need to go and muck around. They need to do things that are going to get the village angry and get posted on the village network and stuff like that. You know
I have enjoyed some. Well, you can see that the patience is starting to wear thin of all of this community sense, because now we are starting to see posts around littering on the wreck.
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed someone the other day had posted a picture of a very good young boy actually dropping some rubbish in the bin. So I'm delighted that we're now celebrating when people actually throw their rubbish away. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. But yeah, you know, they need to go and muck out. They need to get into low level trouble, pushing the boundaries a little bit, as it were. You know, we did have a wheelchair that was brought back here at some point that was in a skip that was now suddenly found in a lane on the village network the other day, and I thought, well, I know where that's come from. I
think I saw it in the alleyway down to the fields just the other day. It looked like it was servicing some good fun.
Yeah, I think it was.
But maybe that, because that for me is one of the learnings, that sense of being grateful for things, being appreciative of things. And I hear what you're saying, that, you know, you don't go into that kind of work in order for people to say thank you. So I also understand that it could be uncomfortable. And like you, I'm not sure I would have wanted to go, stand on the balcony and wave like the Queen while my entire clap for me, because I'm just doing my job. But actually, it was in that moment, my view is it was more than that, because actually everything we did was because of the NHS to protect this big beast that can do such brilliant work, but perhaps isn't able to always get it right when it comes to processes. And yet, during COVID, was able to align processes right across. I used to work with the NHS on when compliance in the corporate governance, the clinical governance program was coming in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And I worked with Barnet and Chase Farm Trust when they were being brought together. So Barnet Hospital was one, had an A&E, Chase Farm was in Enfield, and those two were brought together. And you know what? Neither hospital had the same process for anything. I mean, literally, you could look at every department. They had a different process for doing things. It made it possible, and yet the work they do. So I thank you, and everyone would. So you're just going to have to suck that thanks up, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the NHS, and I'm incredibly proud that I work for the NHS.
Yeah.
And I just, the one thing is I don't want it to be a political weapon, but it always will be. But, I don't want it to be, everything politicised, around what the NHS did for COVID, because then that just, to me, just taints it a little bit. Just taints it. And yes, I'm not naive enough that it is linked to political stuff. And yes, but yeah, I just that's when I get a bit like, it doesn't need to be tainted at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and it can feel a little uncomfortable. Have all of your family been vaccinated then, because you're frontline?
Yeah. So I've had both of mine. Nicola's had her first one. Not so obviously she's a school counsellor, but not because she works in school, because teachers still haven't had it. It's more because she works in counselling, and you're with people in close contact for longer than 15 minutes.
Right.
It's deemed, yeah. So she's had her first. The boys haven't had theirs at all, because they will, because of the job I do doesn't put any of them further up the list than anything at all. They just get in their respective groups, really.
Yeah. So we've had our first jabs in this house, waiting on the second, and I just want to be able to travel again. So I'm looking forward to being given the okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the one. That's the one big thing. You miss, like we went to Walton on the Naze the other week, and it is like, when did going to the seaside seem a little bit like I'm going to Lake Garda or somewhere, and I'm just going up the Naze, it's yeah, and you just want to be able to go and see your family again without it being a great big plan and this, that, and the other. And
well, Richard, I didn't even go as far as that. I went to Aldenham Country Park the other day and sat by the lake and had a nice day, quite frankly.
Life on the edge.
Right, it really is. And I love where we live. I moved here deliberately, but I am a bit bored of the landscape for my dog. I would like to go further. Look, I've got one last question for you, because we've kind of come full circle. We started with the NHS, we finished with it. What's been your biggest lesson during this lockdown pandemic, life in the NHS during a pandemic?
That's really, really hard.
Should have sent that to you like 2 days ago, so you could have thought about it.
Yes, I could have prepped a really good answer, not really cool, really reflective. What's been my biggest lesson? I think that everyone has their own pressures, and no one is better than anyone else, which we knew anyway. But I think, just to all work together a little bit more, rather than rather than just all sort of be polar opposites or be like you know, I think it comes back to like everyone was like the NHS, but it was which you know, but it was still everyone else is making these sacrifices day in day out. You can list anyone in your immediate family, you can list any of your mates, and it will all be a different set of challenges and how it affected them. Lost the job, working from home, homeschooling, not seeing your mates, lost your support bubble, got COVID, got long COVID, worried about having the AstraZeneca jab. It affects everyone in different ways. And I just think it's like, I suppose just always think what is someone going through? We're all really part of a big whole sort of, community.
It's a leveler, I think. When I listen to what you're saying, this is a leveler. It doesn't matter how much money you've got or where you were born. If this disease catches you, you don't want it.
No, exactly. And I think it's a bit like how really in the whole scheme of things and universe and the environment, etc., sort of how fragile and transient life can be, and how really probably you're just a cog in the wheel. I'm probably getting a bit Thomas Hardy-esque here,
No, but there is truth in that, and actually that because everyone's got their own part to play. But I think to your point, everyone has their own experience. Someone said to me early on that I keep hearing we're all in the same boat, and he was like, we're not all in the same boat. He's like, we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats.
Yeah.
Some people's, but if I think of some of the some of the movie stars or Premier League footballers that I heard moaning about how awful it was in lockdown, it may well have been, but of course, how other people perceive that is, well, you've got your great big house and your 5,000 square meters. How can it be? But then you come to your mental health problem, and it's like, well, that doesn't mean they don't feel isolated and alone.
No, exactly, and they still can't. They still, it's like. I'm a keen fan of Colchester United, who need to beat Southend tonight to stay up. But
right.
Big up the Essex derby. But they're the football players. Football players. Matt Hancock. It's very easy to go on football players with their money and stuff like that. But they are entertaining a whole load of people. Not especially the Premiership. It's not just who's in the stadium. It's who's watching it on TV. Who's listening to it. And it gives a lot of joy to a lot of people. And football players are the very easy pick on. We don't pick rugby players off like we do pick football players. They're like sitting ducks sometimes. And yes, they may have their money and they may have their big house, but they're still playing to empty stadiums. They're still, their life has changed as well. And yes, it's you're just expected to sit at home. Yeah, you are expected to sit at home, but it comes back to like you're sitting at home and you're not having the contact you're used to. I was having that.
And look, if you look at just the practical, put my teeth in, the practical side, if all you have to do is sit at home and watch Netflix or Amazon Prime or Sky or BT Sport or play on your PlayStation or your Xbox, actually or you've got your garden, life's not so tough. Every we had here was first world problems. Actually, what I like about your lesson learned is actually, do you know what, we mustn't really judge anybody until we know what sits behind what they're doing.
Exactly.
And I like that, because I think that in itself is a leveler. Don't judge, actually, because like you were saying earlier, you might have an old person coming in at the beginning or somebody coming in towards the end of an illness or what they're presenting, and actually you have to treat everybody with equity.
Everyone has a backstory. Everyone has a whole conflicting set of circumstances that have led them to be where they are and how they're feeling. And it's very easy to judge that, and you shouldn't.
Richard, what I should have done is I should have got you on one of the earlier episodes, then we could have had you come back. Now now we're finishing. There isn't actually time because there's only 2 more to do. So there isn't time to bring you back tomorrow and do another one. That's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For telling that. I think it's a wonderful perspective. And I can't wait to put this out and get people's feedback on listening to your story. Thank you. That was excellent.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Richard Norton, advanced clinical practitioner. Thank you so much for coming on the lockdown.
Cheers.